This is the Podcast Digest. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back. This is Dan Lizette with the Podcast Digest, and we're back with episode number 13, Strangers' Tools. Lucky number 13, right? That's what they say. Well, I guess we will find out. Looking at my notes here, this may very well end up being the longest episode ever of the Podcast Digest, but we'll have to see how we work through everything here today. It's closing in on the Thanksgiving holiday here in the States, and I just wanted to take a few minutes, as this will be the last time I will speak to most of you before the Thanksgiving holiday, and let you know that I'm extraordinarily thankful here at the Podcast Digest for all the emails, the Twitter mentions, the downloads, the suggestions, all of it that's been coming from you. It's really humbling to me that you guys have found the time in your day to think of this show, that you are also as passionate and interested in podcasts as I am, and you want to find some new great stuff in order to fill out your subscription list. If you are a first-time listener, thank you so much, and I hope you go and check out some of the back episodes over at thepodcastdigest.info. As I mentioned, this is episode number 13, so there are 24 other shows recommended in the last 3 months, and I strongly encourage you to check each and every one of those shows out. If you are a first time, let me tell you what you'll be hearing today. I give out 2 show recommendations each and every week, as well as a pro tip section that I call sort of the discussion section. And if you like what you do here, follow the show on Twitter at Pod Digest, or you can search for the Podcast Digest on Facebook, or as I mentioned, bookmark the show's site, thepodcastdigest.info. Before I get into the regular format, I wanted to clarify one question that I've received a couple of times over the first 3 months of the show. Some people have asked what type of shows I review, or how do I decide what I want to review? Or in some cases, I've received feedback like, I don't imagine that huge show needs the help, so why are you reviewing it? In considering this question, I think some folks may be under a false impression of what I'm trying to do here on TPD. This is not a promotional tool. Okay, I'm not into free advertising. I'm not looking to identify shows that need a push or a bump and try to help that show out. That's not what I'm doing. Now, obviously, that's a side effect, I hope, that if I do end up reviewing or positively reviewing a show here in the Podcast Digest, that people end up going and interacting with those shows and subscribing and telling their friends, which is why I'm here. The shows that I select for the Podcast Digest only have one criteria. I have to think they're a great podcast, and they bring significant entertainment value to you, the listener. I'm not on the payroll of anyone. I don't have any advertisers. I don't even know really any of these other podcasts personally. Sure, I've interacted with some of them on Twitter. Obviously, I've listened to their show, and maybe I've grown fond of them as well. But all I'm trying to do each and every week for you is to tell you what shows that I think are great. I've listened to them, I've spent some time with them, and I want to tell you why I like them. Whether these are big shows from major media companies, or they're small shows from somebody like me, a guy in their basement talking to a microphone every week. If I think it's great, I'm going to tell you about it. That's it. Because I think it's worth your subscription. It's that simple, guys. I'm going to continue to feature the big ones, the little ones, the old ones, the new ones, shows that either have 1 million listeners or shows that may only have a couple of dozen. If it's great, I want to end up talking about it here on the Podcast Digest. So just to be clear on that, some people have kind of questioned why I've done such big, large shows and what have you. So anyways, on with the show. Let's begin this week with a technology topic for my pro tip section that I'd like to open the show with. And this one I've had in the works for a couple of weeks. I wanted to make sure that I could speak about it with some real experience. And it has been a long, exhausted topic in the technology circles for the last few months. So I'll try to keep it brief. But I do want to tell you about my new phone. I've spent just about a month with the iPhone 6 Plus, 128 gig on Verizon. And I want to tell you how I think this is great for consuming podcasts or just as a piece of technology itself. I know a lot of you may be considering this particular phone with the holidays coming up, or maybe you have a contract that's expiring soon and you've heard a number of different things. First of all, it hasn't bent. Okay, I think that's been a completely overblown subject in the media, in YouTube videos and what have you. My phone hasn't bent. Okay, the screen size is big. It is a big phone, 5.5 inches, but I will tell you this, you do get used to it. Okay, it is something that over the course of time starts to feel feel more normal as the days and weeks go by. Honestly, I think the screen size is great. It's awesome for watching video. So if you do subscribe to any video podcasts, which I've not particularly highlighted here on the Podcast Digest in the past, but is something I do want to do in the future, watching video on the 5.5-inch screen is amazing. This phone is completely smooth. Everything is fast and fluid. All the interactions with the menus, with the swipes, everything is without hiccups whatsoever. Some of you may have heard about the app optimization situation in terms of if they're just blown up or do they look really big keyboards or blurry. They did at first. It has gotten better over time. Almost all of the applications that I use are pretty much optimized now for the screen size of the 6 Plus. Games are probably the area that lack the most, but they do take the developers longest to update. And honestly, they do look pretty fine, just scaled up as normal. Battery life is amazing on this phone, and for somebody like me who I literally consume 6 to 8 hours a day of podcasts, I have Bluetooth on 24/7 with my Pebble smartwatch. Even with the Bluetooth on, the battery lasts me all day without issue. Carrying it in pockets is really no issue for a guy. You've heard a lot of that. It doesn't fit in my pocket talk. Look, if you're a guy with normal size pants, you're not going to have any issues. For a lady, might be a little different situation. Most women I know, though, do carry their phones in their purses, so it really wouldn't be too much of a problem. Most of the women I know never placed a smaller phone in their pocket, so the bigger one wouldn't make too much difference. But ladies, if you are a pocket carrier, this phone probably won't work for you. One of the software features that I think are great are extensions. It's in iOS 8 and obviously on the iPhone 6 Plus. Works awesome. Photo editing can pull in all of the tools and tricks from another app directly into the default photo app. And so that really makes sure that you're taking advantage of all the applications that you have on the phone. The extension feature is a really nice iOS 8 feature. Talking about the camera and photos, it is amazing, guys. I've had the Galaxy Note 3, Lumia 928, the iPhone 5S. I've had all those handsets in the last year, and this camera is by far the best on any phones. The slow motion feature at the 240 frames per second is absolutely the coolest thing you ever wanted to see as well, so definitely take a look at that. I am a big case hound as well. I've been flipping through a number of different cases. I now have 3. I have the Apple leather case in dark blue, a Tech 21 wallet case, and the Spec Candy Shell grip. All are very good cases. I recommend any of them, but I really haven't settled on one yet. I do have a pretty expensive one that was one of my birthday gifts on the way, hopefully, eventually, from a company called Pad and Quill, a leather and Baltic wood frame case that could be my favorite in the end, but still waiting to see. So maybe I'll come back and update you guys later, more on the case situation with my iPhone 6 Plus. But the bottom line, guys, this is a great phone. It's maybe a little bigger than you're used to, but once you do get accustomed to it, I find that you will probably consider this the best iPhone, if not the best phone you've ever owned. So big 2 thumbs up here from me at the Podcast Digest. So that's it for my technology section. Let's move on with our 2 show recommendations. And I have got 2 great ones for you. My first one is a show called Strangers, another member of the Radiotopia network. The host is Leah Tao. She is on Twitter at LEATHAU. Their website is storycentral.org/strangers. Some information from their website. Leah Tao, a Peabody Award-winning producer, former director of The Moth, if you're familiar with that show, comes her new storytelling baby, Strangers, part of KCRW's independent producer project and PRX's Radiotopia Collective. They call each episode an empathy shot in your arm, featuring true stories about the people we meet, the connections we make, the heartbreaks we suffer, the kindness we encounter, and those frightful moments where we discover that we aren't even who we thought we were. This has been an amazing show to find. I'll be honest, I just discovered it this week as I was looking for a new show to feature here on the Podcast Digest, episode 13, and found this in some of the top chart listings, started to take a listen, and wow. It is a truly impressive show. Before I tell you more details, though, this is part of the Radiotopia Collective, who I've talked about before. Criminal, after a successful Kickstarter campaign, is also now part of that. And if you go to radiotopia.fm, you will find all kinds of shows there that so far, every one that I've sampled or subscribed to has really been a great form of entertainment. I mean, I can't say enough about the shows that seem to be a part of the Radiotopia collective. And they, as I mentioned, they recently completed that successful Kickstarter initiative. So a lot of the shows, including Strangers, are going to be increasing their frequency. They're going to be bringing on some new shows. And they reached a stretch goal that now they're going to be creating pilot development fund to find new talent and hosts and shows. So I expect a lot of great things coming out of Radiotopia.fm over the next year or two. Back to this show, though, this is a storytelling format at its absolute best, and I've really been engaged in this format. I have previously recommended things like Snap Judgment. Everybody's heard of This American Life. I've talked about Criminal, and I've talked about The Lapse, all in the past few weeks. I've really gotten into this, and if you have too, if you've listened to Serial or The Lapse or Criminal, any of these ones that I've talked about, you need to check out Strangers. This is another one-person operation run by Leah, and she puts in music, conducts a whole bunch of interviews, and it's all around top-shelf production values. In the description, Leah claims it is really ready to hit home with each absolutely phenomenal story. This one is pretty impressive. It really strikes an emotional tone, if you will, and it really goes for those stories that are truly impactful. I can't recommend a specific episode to you, as I've only really been through about the last half dozen, but I actually want to highlight one. So maybe I am recommending a specific episode. It's called Screaming with Professionals, released on October 30th of this year. I do not want to ruin the story, but I'll tell you this little side note about it. My wife, who's not a podcast listener, strange, right? that I run the Podcast Digest, and she's not that into podcasts. I did tell her a little bit about this one particular episode, and she was motivated enough to download it and listen to it. And last night, sitting on the couch, she listened to this episode and was completely enthralled for the 25 minutes or so that it was. And it was she was on the verge of tears. I think it was an amazing show. That if you do subscribe to Strangers, check out the October 30th episode, Screaming with Professionals, and that in and of itself will show you what Leah is putting out in terms of some amazing quality. Some of the episodes are a little definitely adult in nature, but that's okay. It's all in the spirit of where the story tells them. It's not egregious in any way in terms of the topic matter or the language. But check this one out, guys. This has been a real treat to find the show, to subscribe it. I've gone back. They have a fairly large history. I believe they've completed 2 seasons, or they're in the 2nd season right now. Check it out. It's called Strangers. Put that in your search box in your podcast app. Follow Leah at Leah Tao, Leathau, or their website, storycentral.org/strangers. You will not be disappointed. That I promise you. Now on to our second show recommendation this week. And I'll tell you, this week as I was going through, I wanted to find something different. I really, as I mentioned, the Strangers is another storytelling podcast. I've done several of those. I've done several technology topics, and I wanted to come with something that I haven't done yet. I really want the Podcast Digest to be varied and cover a lot of different topics, cover a large range or scope of interest. So that's why I am recommending this next podcast to you. It is a business podcast called Manager Tools. The hosts are Michael Ozine and Mark Horstman. Both of them are on the Twitter at MAUZENNE for Michael, and Mark is at MAHORSTMAN. Their website is manager-tools.com. As I mentioned, this is a business-oriented podcast. This is the first one I'm featuring here in the business genre. As some of you may know, at my day job, I've been in people management for years and years. And if you're in any type of supervisory role yourself with your job where you're managing people, I bet you've probably run into situations that have been tough, they've been difficult, they've stressed you out, or maybe you've just not been sure what to do when you're faced with a particular situation. I think people management is a skill like any other. You have to continually learn, and you have to continually focus on improving your skill sets in those areas to be able to do it well. I think the Manager Tools podcast helps you do that. Maybe you haven't had a great mentor or significant formal training in your professional life, and maybe you've look back on different things and wondered if you handled something correctly. The Manager Tools podcast will sort of fill that gap for you. It has over 500 episodes dating back to 2005. So this is not a Johnny-come-lately. This is not some brand new podcast. It has been around a long time, and you can imagine with that many episodes, all the different subject matter and topics that they've covered and are available for free through their podcast library. They're very consumable, 15 to 25 minutes long, sort of like here on the Podcast Digest. Great sound quality, usually two hosts discussing a particular subject and really digging deep, and they give guidance, if you will, basically try to tell you how you would want to handle a particular situation. Full disclosure here, it is pretty clear, especially when you go to their website, that this podcast is a vehicle for their primary business, a consultancy, and they're selling licenses to a lot of the transcript and other materials around the Manager Tools product. But I can tell you that I've not purchased the license. I've not gone deeper into anything beyond the podcast. But it has been, as I said, invaluable in terms of a resource. It's very rare on the podcast that they talk about the monetization strategy, if you will, these other things that you could purchase or subscribe to. You don't get the sense when you listen to this that this is all that it's for. It really feels like it's about conveying knowledge and experience that they've had in their careers and sharing it with the listeners. But as I mentioned, the catalog is so vast. Every topic has been discussed. I mean, hiring to firing, interviewing, conflict resolution, time management, email etiquette, and on and on and on. I can imagine, how they go about trying to figure out what to put together each episode, because there seems to be like they've covered so much. And I really want to tell you why I wanted to feature Manager Tools. I realized something when I was considering putting this on the docket for this episode. And interestingly, the Manager Tools podcast is probably the podcast that I've had the most word-of-mouth recommendations that I've relayed to other people. In my role, I do supervise other managers. I'm at the director level, and so I have managers and supervisors that report to me, and oftentimes in my conversations with them about a particular subject, I'll let them know that if they wanted to do something on their own time, to try to kind of hear a different perspective, that they could look at this free podcast, and I tell them how to go out and get it, through the podcast app if they have an iPhone, or Beyond Pod or Stitcher if they have an Android, and tell them that, this would be an investment in your future, and that while this isn't an official company endorsed product, there's a lot of great things here just for yourself personally that can help you handle particular situations that come up. And it's interesting to me that how many times I've done this. I've listened to Manager Tools for 4 or 5 years now, ever really since I've started out in podcasts, and I've found it a phenomenal resource for people in people management. So if that's you, or if you know somebody who is, this might be a great suggestion, and to let them know that, it might be worth checking out. Scroll through the titles on the episodes and figure out, hey, that one applies to me. I want to check that one out. And I think that they'll be pleasantly surprised with what they find. So, once again, one more time, that show is called Manager Tools, hosted by Michael Ozine and Mark Horstman. Their website, manager-tools.com. And it is our first business-oriented podcast here on the Podcast Digest. So that is episode 13. A little bit to talk about my new iPhone 6 Plus Strangers, part of Radiotopia and Manager Tools, a great business podcast for those in people management. I hope you guys have enjoyed listening this week. I look forward to next week's show. Hopefully, if I can put together all of the final details, I will be having my first in-person guest. So episode 14 will be breaking from format. I just wanted to give you guys that warning in advance. Of course, the holidays are coming, so I won't be able to do as much research and put together the episode as I like to typically do. Instead, hopefully my younger brother, will be our first in-house guest here on the Podcast Digest. In addition, I'm also working on being a guest spot as well. I don't want to get into too much information about it yet. We're sort of giving it a trial run, I believe, tomorrow night as my first test here with all my setup. So in case something were to fail and it wasn't out there, and I'm not sure when the host plans on releasing it, but follow me at Pod Digest. I will definitely be making some announcements. Also putting up on the Facebook page. Search for the Podcast Digest on Facebook. And I'm sure I'll do a blog post about it as well on the website, thepodcastdigest.info, for all the information about my appearance on that show, as well as hopefully some other shows coming up. I've really had a lot of discussions here lately about taking the Podcast Digest to the next level. I do want to bring on guests. As I mentioned, tomorrow is a dry run for that format. If it works as well as I hope that it will, I'm going to actively be seeking out guests from other shows or listeners to be able to bring on to the Podcast Digest to add another variety, maybe another segment. And I hope that you guys enjoy it. A couple ideas. Haven't reached out to anybody yet, only because tomorrow will be the dry run and we will see. But that will do it for episode 13. I hope you guys have enjoyed. If you have, tell a friend, won't you? Share it on Twitter, share it on Facebook, share it on Pinterest, on Tumblr, wherever you like. Let people know that this is a great place to come for them to find out new podcasts. There's been a lot of talk lately about podcasts enjoying a renaissance or podcasts are back. The show Serial is obviously bringing a lot of new listeners to the medium, and I think that's great for all of us podcasters. If people do try Serial and they like it and they say, wow, what other podcasts are out there? Send them here. Send them to the podcastdigest.info. Tell them take a listen to some of the back episodes, and hopefully they'll find some things that they like. That'll do it for this week, guys. My name's Dan Lizette, and I will talk to you next time.